good. Please,
Okay.
hello to everyone. In the name of the SCOR Foundation for Science, I am pleased again to introduce the current webinar, which is dedicated to the following topic: the middle class and the coming risk of collapse of the consumer society. This webinar will be delivered by Gilles Saint-Paul, who will analyze how the oversupply of skills may lead to a fall in the returns to skills, which may in turn jeopardize the middle class and through its consequences on the structure of demand, the entire industrial society. He will apply these results to the politics of artificial intelligence. And it's a personal point of view. It is a quick question for us in terms of macroeconomic risk that helps to better rationalize the risk, for example, of stagnation in advanced economies, and much better than the assumption, for example, of secular stagnation that has been supported by two brilliant economists. We were sometimes discussing on them, Laurence Summers and Olivier Blanchard. Please, if you could close your micro, turn out your micro. Please, thank you. Gilles Saint-Paul is an internationally renowned economist. He's professor of economics at the Ecole Normale Supérieure and at the Paris School of Economics. And he is the holder of the SCOR-PSE macroeconomics share since 2017. He has published in the best international journals and written numerous landmark works in economic analysis. He won the Israel Johnson Prize. I just apologize for my pronunciation of his Danish name in 2007. A prize which is awarded every 2 years to a European economist under the age of 45 who has made a contribution, fundamental contribution in theoretical and applied research that is significant to economics in Europe. Gilles Saint-Paul already presented a webinar on inflation for the foundation in May 2022. As per usual, the webinar will last 90 minutes maximum from 3 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. Paris time. And if you have understanding questions, please ask your question as you go during the presentation of Gilles. But for substantive question, challenge, etc., please ask them at the end of the presentations. Gilles, many thanks to have accepted to make this presentation. You have the floor. Let us say for 40 to 60 minutes, depending on how much time you need. Thereafter, we will open the discussion with the audience and we will close the webinar when questions will have been exhausted and at latest at 4:30 p.m. Dear Gilles, dear participants, please accept also my apologies because I will have to leave in 45 minutes as I must travel to Brussels and make a presentation myself at the Geneva Association. You know very well, the Worldwide Insurance Association. Zeng will take over when I leave. Gilles, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to give this online talk, and thank you to all the participants. I will start with a sort of disclaimer or apology. What I'm going to present reflects my current research, and it's relatively theoretical. Okay? First, because this is what I'm doing right now, and second, because the topic is inevitably a little bit speculative. So whatever evidence I will present is not the evidence that I'm trying to explain, it's meant to be, if you want, illustrative and motivational, essentially. So I hope not everybody is going to leave the room after I've said that. I think I have made sure that the way I will present these results and this research will be accessible to virtually everybody, but it's relatively theoretical. Okay. Now let me share my screen. Okay. And so can everybody see?
Yes, we see it. We see it very well.
Then, and this should be even better.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so basically the motivation is that it's a pretty personal interest. We live in advanced economies live in a consumer society. They are pretty affluent. People consume a broad range of products. Living standards are relatively high, and it always struck me that these advanced societies, in particular the US, Europe, etc., rests on a sort of middle class of educated workers, clerical workers, skilled workers, who have the twofold role of operating modern technologies that are based on a lot of organizational aspects, a lot of division of labor, complex organizations. So on the one hand, they manage those complex organizations, and on the other hand, the middle class provides the bulk of demand for consumer products. So there is this sort of interplay, if you want, between the fact that the technology is advanced, sophisticated, and therefore relatively intensive in skills, as opposed to traditional craft technology as it was, say, before the Industrial Revolution. There is an interplay between this technological aspect on the one hand and the distribution of income, which delivers a structure of demand that is conducive to a prosperous consumer society. So this is what I am interested in, if you want, and I'm going to start discussing the fragility of consumer society, which is that if that middle class were to shrink or to disappear, then there would be a lower demand for a whole range of products that are mass-produced. And the first point I'm going to make is that this may be a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then lots of those, because then you would not need, it would not be profitable to operate mass production techniques for many of those goods. And if you do not operate a mass production technique, then you revert to an inferior technique, which is much less intensive in skills than the mass production technique, which means that you need fewer skills, and therefore the returns to skill fall, and indeed the middle class shrinks as was expected. Okay? So many people, and that would be even truer 10 years ago, and many labor economists would think that I'm a little bit of a lunatic, because the doxa, if you want, the conventional wisdom is that over the recent decades, the demand for skills has gone up. This has triggered an increase in wage inequality, and if anything, this goes in the opposite direction what I'm speculating about. But if you look more closely at what's going on, and if you look at what may happen in the future, in the near future, things are not so clear because some branch of this empirical labor literature makes the point that it's not so much the returns to skills that has increased as the fact that the middle of the distribution of wages is shrinking. So it's true that highly skilled workers have gained because of all the skilled bias technical change that has been implemented since numerous decades, since at least the invention of the personal computer. But at the same time, the really low-skilled segments of the labor market are not disappearing because they perform tasks that are so-called non-routine manual tasks. That is to say, like being a gardener, if you want, and it's harder to automatize those tasks than to automatize the tasks of, say, accountants or people who do the coding in the IT department. And so there is this whole literature which focuses on the shrinking middle. It's called polarization in the labor market. And this is illustrated in this graph, which I borrowed from a recent paper by UNAS. And the blue line is the increase in skilled employment, okay, from 1978. So this is, if you want, the share of skilled employment in total employment. And you see that it grows. It's more and more important. In fact, it sort of flattens out a little bit since 2000. The red line is the share of middle skilled employment, and it shrinks a lot from more than 20 to 15, 16. So these are really the workers for whom the demand for labor is falling. And then the low skilled people, which is the green line, this is more or less flat. Okay? So it's more the middle skilled people that have suffered from IT intensive technical change rather than the low skilled people proper. And so from this graph, you might speculate that indeed there might be a reduction in the size of the lower middle class, if you want to put it that way, and that could have an effect on the demand for a number of goods that will have consequences for the evolution of a consumer society. Now, this is from a French paper which always struck me because its findings are so much at variance with the conventional wisdom. This is the evolution of the returns to different educational categories in France between on the one hand 1997 and 2015 and 2003 and 2015. And what these people claim, Argan and Gary Bobo, is that in reality, since 2003, it's the skilled workers, at least in France. I'm not claiming this is general, but presumably the forces that drive these evolutions are also present elsewhere. Since 2003 in France, the returns, the relative wages of skilled workers have fallen. Okay, this is undergrad business school. It has fallen by a subsequent amount, minus 16%. So these are people who have the equivalent of a master's degree, if you want. This is a PhD, minus 7%, engineering school, minus 6%, M2, this is equivalent, it's a master's degree, minus 10%. And if we look at the least skills, these are high school graduates, Bac Pro, Bac Techno. then actually their wages have gone up. Okay, and the same thing for CAPBEP, which is vocational training. So the general message of this graph, of course, there are some French specificities, but the general message of this graph is that it's the skilled workers since 2003 that have been the losers in terms of the evolution of earnings in France. Okay. Part of the explanation has certainly to do with regulatory intervention by the government in wage setting, but the other part, in my view, is that there has been a considerable increase in the supply of graduates, of university graduates, and this has led to this loss of wages. Okay? And as we shall see in my model, the situation where there is a sort of excess skill overhang, if you want, in society, may lead to a situation where there is the risk of collapse of the middle class and of consumer society. Okay, so these are, as I said, these are motivational evidence. Motivational in the sense that the story I'm going to tell right now is consistent with those evolutions, but of course there are other models, maybe less less sophisticated models that could also explain those trends. Okay, but at least I hope that this will convince you that what I'm talking about is not completely independent of trends that we observe in the real world. So basically, my point is, my story is based on three main ingredients of the model, three main assumptions. The first assumption is that technology has increasing returns, okay? Which means that to operate a modern industrial technology, you have fixed costs. You need to pay accountants, you need to pay the human resource department, you need to pay managers, IT workers, maybe a team of lawyers, all sorts of people. It's an advanced technology based on a sharp division of labor. And when you have a sharp division of labor, you need to coordinate all these people, and these are the fixed costs. Okay? And every time you have fixed costs, then the profitability to use the advanced technology depends on the market size for your product. If the market size is not big enough, it is not useful, it is not profitable to use the advanced technology. You are better off using less advanced technology that has a higher unit cost of production because it has a less division of labor, but you save on the fixed cost. So the key ingredient of the story is that there is this, this link between the market size for each good and the likelihood that it will be, I call this industrialized, that is to say, that it will be produced according to the advanced industrial technology, as opposed to some old technology which does not have fixed costs. The second key ingredient is that there is, by assumption, a hierarchy of needs in utility, in the preferences of the people. In many economic analysis, for reasons of convenience, we assume what is called, what we call, oh my God, I have not homothetic preferences, which means that if your income doubles, then you consume twice of each good. Of course, this is a very unrealistic assumption. In general, there is a hierarchy of needs. First, you buy a house, then you buy a refrigerator, then you buy a car, then you buy a freezer, then maybe you will buy a stereo system, and then maybe you will travel abroad, go to some music festival, and so on and so forth. And therefore, when your income doubles, you do not double the number of refrigerators that you are consuming. Instead, you use your extra income to travel abroad. So this is the idea of the hierarchy of needs preferences. And of course, in theoretical models, we do these things in a very stylized way. And so I'm assuming that you consume 1 unit of each good in a given order. Okay, so first the house, second the refrigerator, third the car, and so on and so forth. And a key issue, a key consequence of this assumption is that the market size for each product depends on the distribution of income. Okay? If, as people do often, preferences are homothetic, and if I take some money out of Peter and I give it to Paul, then it does not change anything to the structure of demand, because if I take I assume they have the same income, okay, or 1,000. If I take 500 out of Peter and I give it to Paul, then Peter will reduce his demand for each good by 50%, but Paul will increase his demand for each good by exactly the same amount, and therefore the total demand for each good is unchanged. So under homothetic preferences, the market size for each good depends on income distribution. Now, I assume there is a hierarchy of needs. If everybody is, not totally poor, but has a relatively mediocre income, nobody is going to buy a stereo system. Everybody will have a refrigerator, but nobody will have a stereo system. If I take some money out of these relatively poor people and I give it somewhat unfairly to a small class of people whom I make very rich, then those people are going to purchase stereo systems. And therefore, the market size for this good, stereo systems, is going to be higher if I increase this inequality in wages. Okay, so a very important consequence of the hierarchy of needs preference is that market size for any good depends on the overall distribution of income in society. And this is the reason why the size of the middle class, defined as skilled workers, to speak broadly, is going to be relevant for the overall economic performance of the economy, for productivity in particular, because because the size of the middle class affects the demand for each good. Okay, and if most goods, if we suppose there is a transition from an economy which is relatively egalitarian, like say Sweden, to a very inegalitarian economy like Brazil, then it means that there will be a much lower demand for coffee, Nespresso coffee machines or whatever, or even iPhones, although maybe that is not a very good example. And on top of that, there will be an increase in the demand for fancy meals and personal financial advisors and so on and so forth. So the whole structure of demand will change, and maybe it won't be profitable anymore to mass produce coffee machines. So this is the idea. And the third ingredient of the model is that there are fixed overhead costs to operate the advanced modern technology in terms of skills. And so the size of the middle class itself depends on the range of goods that use the modern technology. The broader the range of goods that use the modern technology, the bigger the size of the middle class, the more skilled people there are in the economy. Okay, so I have, in economic theory, we have lots of equations and lots of Greek letters. I kept this at a minimum. just to give you an idea of how it works, we have this old traditional technology that uses raw labor, and they are paid a wage which, for simplicity, is equal to 1, and it has constant returns to scale, which means that you need to, if I want, the number of people I use to produce this is proportional to how many goods I produce, okay? And so there is a unit cost equal to C subscript O, and this is a competitive sector, so this is the price at which these goods are sold. Okay, so in any good, you can always produce using the old technology. But you also have a modern technology where the unit marginal cost of production is just C sub N, which is smaller than C sub O, meaning that the new technology is more productive than the old technology, a lower unit cost in terms of how many units of raw labor, how many unskilled labor you need to produce 1 unit of output. But on the other hand, you need to pay an overhead cost to operate that technology, accountants, etc. So you need small m skilled workers, and in any equilibrium of this economy, they will have a wage, the wage of skilled labor, which I call omega. And this is going to play a role later. I'm assuming that the modern technology is owned by a single capitalist, okay? So like if you want Bill Gates, who owns Microsoft and the patents that are associated with Microsoft, or Elon Musk or people like that, they own the modern technology because they own the patent, and they are the ones who single-handedly decide whether or not this modern technology is going to operate or not. Okay? And so basically the problem of these capitalists is very simple. They are able to charge a price, we call it a limit price in economics, equal to the cost of their competitors, who use the old technology. So they charge at price C sub O, their unit cost is C sub N, and the number of units of the good that they sell is called small y. So their profit is CO minus Cn times small y minus M, which is the number of skilled workers they need to operate the overhead, times omega, which is the wage of those skilled workers. Okay, so this is the profit that I make. And the key, the most important point here is that this profit depends on why. It depends on my market size. And if my market size is too small, this would be negative. Okay? If I don't sell enough units of my good, then it's not profitable for me to operate my technology. So only the goods that have a big enough market size are going to be mass produced. Any good that has a market size smaller than a critical level is not going to be mass produced. It will be instead produced using the old technology. So basically, it's a model where people differ by skills. I'm not going to go into the detail, but they can acquire skills. Given that they differ in, if you want, innate ability, they are going to acquire different skill levels. So we have a distribution of skills in the labor market, which drives the distribution of income. And therefore, I'm assuming that everybody has 1 unit of raw labor and small s units of skills, so that the total income of somebody with skill small s is 1 plus omega, the wage of skills, times the small s. Okay? So that's my income if I am somebody with skills S, and I'm going to consume n different goods, 1 unit of each of those goods, and they all have the same price C sub O, regardless of whether the modern technology is operating or not in this sector. And therefore, the range of goods that I consume, small n, is just my total income, 1 plus omega times S, divided by CO, which is the price of each good. And so basically, in order to figure out whether or not it is profitable to operate the new technology, I have to look at the market size for good J, which is proportional to the number of people in the economy who are rich enough to buy it. Okay? If everybody is too poor to buy a coffee machine, then the market size is 0. If only 5% of the population is rich enough to buy a coffee machine, then the market size is 5% of the population. But at the same time, if having a home is very important, if the home comes first in the hierarchy of needs, then the market size for homes will be 100%. If I construct homes, everybody is going to buy a home, so the market size is always bigger for goods that are ranked before in the hierarchy of needs. Okay? So the people, this is a typo, it should be J, CO, J. So the people who can afford to go J are those whose income is bigger than CO times J, okay? Because it means that J is the most sophisticated good, the most highly ranked good that they are buying. And so basically the number of people whose income is greater than CO times J depends on two things: the returns to skill omega and the distribution of skills in the population, small s. And so basically in this kind of economy, we have two kinds of goods. We have goods where the oligarch or the capitalist who owns the advanced technology will operate it because it is profitable, and goods where he will not operate it, where those goods instead will be produced by small producers using the older technology. And as the rank of a good J goes up, fewer and fewer people buy it because it's more and more sophisticated. Therefore, the market size falls, and therefore it's more likely that it is not mass produced. Okay? So when you go to the theater, for example, this is not mass produced, but typically poor people cannot afford to go to the theater. And so there is a cutoff rank J star such that if your rank J is smaller than J star, then the good is mass produced. And if it's bigger than J star, it is not mass produced. And then it's very simple to derive from this the demand for skills. Each good which is mass produced needs small m skilled people to produce it as an overhead, and therefore the total demand for skills is S equals small m times J star, the number of goods that are mass produced times the overhead skill requirement to produce one of those goods using the modern technology. So this is the demand for skills, and the supply of skills is just an increasing function of the market wage for skills, which is called small omega. So from there, my theory collapses to just two equations. One says that the demand for skills S of omega, the demand for skills M times J star is equal to the supply of skills S times omega. And the other says that the critical good J star, the most sophisticated good that can be mass produced, has exactly a zero profit. Okay? And so any good which is even more sophisticated than J star, and therefore has an even lower market share, would have negative profits because Y of J would be smaller than Y of J star if it were mass produced. Therefore, it will not be mass produced. And all the goods lower than J star will be mass produced because the capitalist would make a positive profit by using the modern technology, given that for goods less ranked than J star, the market size Y of J is greater than Y of J star, and therefore this expression would be positive. So basically, the key force that I am identifying here, the key economic force that I am identifying, is that the size of the middle class depends on the number of goods that are industrialized, because it is the advanced technology that generates the middle class as skilled producers in that technology. And at the same time, the larger the middle class, the broader the range of goods that have a critical market size to operate with the modern technology. And therefore, the middle class is self-sustaining. The people who operate, if you want to put it in a stark way, the people who operate the mass production technology are also the people who buy the products of the mass production technology. So basically, let me elaborate a little bit on this. Suppose that the skilled wage omega goes up. Okay, so for some reason, just because people think that it should go up. Okay. So basically, it has an impact effect, which is that in any mass-produced company, I need to pay my accountants more, and I need to pay the IT people more, and the lawyers more, and the HR people more, and the marketing people more. Okay, and of course, this reduces profits. The cost of my skilled workers is higher. This reduces profits. But at the same time, all these people who are paid more are going to buy new goods that they did not buy before. They are going to buy a coffee machine, for example. And if they buy a coffee machine, it may be that the profits in the coffee machine sector go up, and it may be that it was not profitable before to mass produce coffee machines, but now it becomes profitable to mass produce coffee machines. And therefore, if that effect is strong enough, then the increase in the skilled wage omega will increase the market size Y of J for mass produced goods. And my point is that this effect, this market size effect, may dominate the direct negative effect of a more expensive skilled labor force on profits. And if that effect dominates, then an increase in the wage, instead of having in the skilled wage, instead of having the standard effect of reducing the demand for skills, will in fact increase the demand, will raise the demand for skills. So that the net demand for skills could actually go up. Okay, so this is illustrated on this graph here. Okay, on the horizontal axis, there is J, which is the rank of your good, how sophisticated is your good. Okay, and this black line here plots the profits of the mass production firm of good J as a function of J. So if J is low enough, everybody buys this good, you have a full market share, and therefore you have the maximum profit level. And then if at some point the good becomes more and more sophisticated, fewer people buy it, and so this profit function falls with J because market size falls with J. At some point it's going to intersect the horizontal line at zero profits, which means that we are at the critical level J star. Each good that is more sophisticated than that is not going to be mass produced. It's going to be produced according to the old technology. And each good which is less sophisticated than this is going to be mass produced. And then when you have an increase in the cost of skilled labor omega, you have two effects. You have the cost effect, which reduces the profits through the term in M omega minus M omega in the expression for profits. So this curve tends to shift down, which would, if this was the only effect, reduce J star because it would move to the left. The intersection would move to the left. But at the same time, if omega goes up, the market size for each good would go up. and more people would like to buy coffee machines. And so this would tend to push up the profit curve. This is what would happen with the green line. And if that effect is strong enough, then on net, this profit line would shift up. And therefore, J star would go up, okay, which means that an increase in the wage of skilled labor would actually increase the number of goods that are mass produced. And so for this reason, there can be what we call multiple equilibria. That is to say, in the same economy, two situations could be possible. One situation is a situation where the wage of skilled labor is high, the returns to skill is high, and then we have a large middle class of skilled workers who buy many goods, broad range of goods, and therefore a large number of goods are mass produced. This is a mass consumption society, if you want. But it could be that there is another self-sustaining situation here where the wages of skilled workers are much lower. The range of goods that are mass produced is much smaller, and therefore the economy is less productive, and workers are poorer, okay, overall, because they get less money when they acquire skills. And so if you speculate that advanced economies are in such a high wage of skills and a highly industrialized equilibrium here, and if there exists another equilibrium, it means that by sheer chance, by sheer pessimism, the economy could leave that equilibrium, that good equilibrium, and end up in this bad equilibrium here, where skilled workers have a much lower wage and where the middle class is much smaller. So the nice thing with models is that you can prove, you can compare these two equilibriums and you can show a certain number of results. First of all, the high equilibrium has more wage inequality. That is because the returns to skills is higher and people differ in their skills level. If the returns to skill were zero, everybody would only earn income from their raw labor, and raw labor being more or less uniformly distributed in society, there will be much less wage inequality. But still, that is not good news. There is a lower wage inequality because everybody is earning a low wage, okay? So there is more inequality in the high equilibrium, the high omega equilibrium. But all workers are better off in the high equilibrium because all workers acquire more skills in the high equilibrium than in the low equilibrium. Maybe I am a college dropout in the high equilibrium, and I'm substantially poorer than people with PhDs. But in the low equilibrium, I would not even go to college in the first place because it's not worth it. So I would be on the same, I would be on par with the PhDs who would not acquire a PhD in the first place. We would have the same income, but still we would both be worse off compared as workers compared to the high equilibrium. Then you can show that the total profits of capitalists, they can be higher or lower in the high equilibrium because the capitalists who produce goods that everybody buys are better off in the low equilibrium since they sell to everybody, but have lower overhead costs since the skilled workers are less costly for them. But capitalists who have a lower market share, they might prefer the high equilibrium to the low equilibrium because in the low equilibrium, nobody might want to buy their products anyway, and therefore they would have zero profits in the low equilibrium. So different capitalists have different preferences if they were to choose between these two equilibria, and if you aggregate the profits of everybody, you cannot really predict which way it goes. Okay. So the takeaway from all this is that if there are multiple equilibria, and if you are in a good equilibrium, there is the risk of a catastrophic transition to a low equilibrium where the middle class collapses and there is deindustrialization. The mass production technologies are abandoned because not enough people buy the corresponding goods. One thing that may trigger such a catastrophe is a change in some characteristics of the economy that would make the good equilibrium disappear. Okay, this is illustrated on this graph. Okay, so basically this coexistence of multiple equilibria comes from the fact that we have a supply of skills here, which is an increasing function of the wage of skills, but because of the demand effects that I talked about, the demand for skills, which is this curve here, is not necessarily a decreasing function of the wage of skills, because along this portion, because the more highly paid skilled workers consume more goods, then you industrialize more goods and you hire more skilled workers. So, so there might be multiple equilibria in the sense that there might be multiple intersections between the demand curve and the supply curve for skills. So suppose we are at a good equilibrium here, high wages, large middle class, large demand for skills, and suppose that there is a change in the economy that reduces the demand for skills a little bit, okay? Then this curve shifts down, and in the configuration I have drawn, there is no longer the good equilibrium. It has disappeared. Now there is only one equilibrium, which is the low equilibrium. So this small change in the demand for skills, this small reduction in the demand for skills, triggers a catastrophic transition of the economy from the good equilibrium, which no longer exists, to the bad equilibrium. There is a massive fall in the returns to skills and a massive collapse of the middle class. And so this result tells you what happens when some parameters of the model change, and in particular, what I am especially interested in is this small m here, which is the overhead cost, which is the number of bureaucrats or technocrats that you need to operate the mass production technology. Okay. And what this proposition is telling you is that if you reduce, if you trim management layers, if you reduce the number of bureaucrats through some managerial innovation, you reduce this M. If you stay at the same equilibrium, that is good because it's less costly for firms, lower fixed costs, so you can actually operate more goods under the mass production technology. So if M goes up, well, this J star falls. If M goes down, it goes up. So there are more goods that are mass produced. But at the same time, if I reduce the size of the bureaucracy, then it's more likely that the high equilibrium ceases to exist. So this configuration that I just discussed may be triggered by a reduction in the number of overhead workers that you need in the company. Okay? So individually, each company is using fewer skilled workers. The problem is that it reduces the returns to skilled labor, and people reduce their demands for some goods, and those goods are no longer profitable to operate under the mass production technology. And if they are no longer profitable to operate under the mass production technology, then they are going to lay off all their skilled workers, which is going to trigger a snowballing effect, if you want, and we end up in this bad equilibrium where there are much fewer skills and a much lower return to skills. Okay, I don't have time to discuss all this, but these results are somewhat related to the evolution of market concentration in the economy. There is a lot of debate about that, lots of research, but some recent papers suggest that if you measure things correctly, then concentration has fallen. So basically, these people partition the goods between highly concentrated goods and unconcentrated goods, and they find that they find that more and more goods are in fact unconcentrated, and the share of goods that are highly concentrated has fallen. Okay, so this is a little bit consistent with my model, because if a sector uses the mass production technology, which has increasing returns to scale, then in reality there is only one producer, the capitalist, who has the whole market. So sectors that are mass produced are highly concentrated, whereas sectors that do not use this technology because they have a too low market size are unconcentrated. So if you are in a process of transitioning from the good equilibrium to the bad equilibrium, then according to my story, you should observe a fall in concentration, which is consistent with at least the evidence found in that paper. Also, when you are in such a process, people use the advanced technology less relative to the old technology, so you expect a productivity slowdown, and that's indeed what's happening if you compare productivity growth between 2022 and the preceding period, 1973-2000. In most economies, productivity has slowed down. Okay? So it's consistent somewhat with my story if you interpret this as the fact that there is people are backing off the increasing returns technologies. Okay, I'm going to skip this, and I'm going to skip this. Well, I guess I will be finished in 10 minutes maximum. So what about artificial intelligence? I believe this model casts some light about what the effect of artificial intelligence on a mass consumption society could have, and what policies might be put in place to address those effects. So basically, it's very easy to introduce artificial intelligence in the model by assuming that you replace accountants, you replace the human resource department by artificial intelligence. So far, the conventional wisdom is that automation has harmed unskilled workers, people who perform routine manual tasks, for example. They are replaced by machine tools. But now we are talking about artificial intelligence, right? Intelligence means it performs intelligent tasks. So maybe what we are going to observe from now is that it's going to replace skilled workers. Okay, so here I am assuming that artificial intelligence allows you to replace your overhead skilled workers by itself, and therefore it's as if this M, which is the demand, the skilled content of the mass production technology, let's assume that it's reduced to 0, okay, which is of course very good news for any individual producer. So then, of course, the demand for skills would fall to 0. Nobody would go to university, and the middle class would collapse you would end up with only a working class of people who are all the same, essentially, and only derive income from their raw labor force. And then there would be a class of oligarchs or capitalists who own the mass production technology. And the problem is that there would be very few people left to purchase those mass-produced goods. And therefore, for many goods, not all, but for many goods, you would no longer mass-produce them because nobody is rich enough to purchase a coffee machine except a few oligarchs, but it's not worth mass-producing coffee machines then. And then, okay, the artificial intelligence allows you to produce a lot of coffee machines at a very low cost, but you're not going to use it because too few people are going to purchase these coffee machines. And therefore, the AI society would self-destroy. Okay? And that's a property of this hierarchy of needs model. If you had homothetic preferences, there would be no problem. The oligarchs would purchase 20,000 coffee machines each, and the market size for coffee machines would not be reduced by the redistribution away from skilled workers to capitalists induced by artificial intelligence. But of course, the oligarchs are not going to purchase 20,000 coffee machines. They are going to purchase yachts and cruises and massages, and therefore nobody is going to operate the advanced technology for coffee machines. So then, starting from this hypothesis, I am assuming that we are in a society which is in fact controlled by capitalists, and I'm asking myself, what kind of policies would they put in place in order to address this problem? And if you want, I run a horse race between two things. One is redistribution. There is a lot of talk about universal basic income. And so could the AI world evolve to a situation where the capitalists would tax themselves collectively, they would tax their own profits to distribute a basic income to their to the working class? Could this be in their interest because the working class would then purchase more goods? And so by implementing this basic income, you would sustain the consumer society, which would collapse absent such redistribution. So this is option one. You implement artificial intelligence, but you give money to the people out of a tax on profits so that everybody consumes more. And the other option, which I call the post-Fordism, is that it's not necessarily feasible. Some people criticize me on that, but let's assume it is feasible. You block the use of AI through some regulation so that you maintain a middle class of workers to operate the advanced technology, and therefore you maintain the distribution of income that supports the initial consumer society. Of course, from the pure point of view of productive efficiency, it's a bad idea, right? You prevent people from using a superior technology. You force people to hire accountants, but these are more or less bullshit jobs because the reality is that AI could do their job at a zero cost instead, but by doing so, you maintain some social cohesion. You maintain a large number of middle-class jobs that maintains the basis for mass consumption society. Okay, so let's assume that the capitalists could block AI. Okay. Well, this is a slide that shows that indeed lots of highly skilled occupations are quite exposed to AI. Okay, for example, well, these are the green these green dots and these red dots, and we can see that for example, for science and technology, they were quite sheltered from computerization and automation, 20% exposure, but they are much more exposed to artificial intelligence, 80% exposure. Okay, so this motivates all this analysis. Okay. So basically, when you think in those terms, you end up realizing that there is a conflict of interest among oligarchs. If I produce refrigerators, then even if most people are poor, you know, in any case, I sell to the working class. Everybody has a refrigerator, and therefore I will continue to operate my my mass production technology no matter what, and therefore my profits would go up with artificial intelligence, even if nobody supplements the income of the working class. Okay, I don't want to give more money to the working class because they all purchase a refrigerator no matter what. So if you give more money to the working class, they are going to purchase something else in addition to the refrigerator. But that's not my problem. I produce refrigerators. But if I produce coffee machines, then under AI, without redistribution, maybe nobody is going to purchase my coffee machines. So I am quite happy to tax the profits of other capitalists, myself, but also other capitalists, to fund for universal basic income, because then everybody will buy my coffee machine. So there is this conflict of interest. Okay, if I produce basic goods, I don't want to block AI. I don't want to redistribute if there is AI. If I produce sophisticated goods, then I might want to block AI because AI would destroy my profits for general equilibrium reasons. And if there were AI, then I would be in favor of redistributing so that people can purchase my product. So then we know who would support universal basic income among the oligarchy and who would support blocking AI. These are the people who produce relatively sophisticated goods. The less obvious question is which of the two options would they prefer? Do I prefer to block AI, or do I prefer to allow for AI and redistribute? And here my results are not complete, they are somewhat preliminary, but they indicate that the oligarchs who produce sophisticated goods, assuming that they are the ones who weigh more in the decision process, they would prefer to allow for AI and redistribute. So they would not maintain a post-Fordist society where people are paid in those jobs because it makes them useful consumers. They would prefer instead to get rid of all these accountants, implement AI, but then give money to the people so that they consume. Okay. I'm going to skip this. So this is the basic result. However, for this to hold, you need two conditions. If you want, the first thing is that there is no limit to how much you can redistribute under AI. Okay, if for some reason you could not tax profits more than a certain amount, then this decisive oligarch would not be able to redistribute enough under AI so that people would buy his products, and then he would be more inclined to lobby or vote for regulations that would block AI. Okay, so if there are limits to redistributions, then we could be in a situation where the oligarchy would prefer to block artificial intelligence. And the other thing that I'm assuming is that the power of each group or of each corporate interest is the same. The political power is the same regardless of whether AI is around or not. Okay? But if it were the case that under AI, this decisive oligarch could have lower power, maybe because the working class would organize and shift the balance of power to the direction of more redistribution than what this oligarch would want, then it could be in the interest of the oligarch to block AI in the first place. Okay, so that's basically the consequences of this analysis, if you want, for the politics of AI. And let me conclude with a different approach, where instead of assuming that the decision-making process is taken in accordance to some decisive capitalist or decisive oligarchs, we could assume that everybody is organized, everybody in the corporate sector is organized as a lobby, and the lobbies contribute money to the policymakers. If you want, they bribe the policymakers to make decisions. So it's a pretty different way of thinking of the decision-making process. And in fact, the logic is quite different, because in such a world, you can show that through the competition between lobbies in offering rewards to the policymaker will eventually make the decision that maximizes total profits. Okay? And you can show then that if AI is implemented, there will not be any UBI, there will not be any redistribution, because the producers of refrigerators will outbid the producers of coffee machines in the competition for influencing policy. Okay? The producers of refrigerators have more to lose from UBI than the producers of coffee machines have to gain. And therefore, they will outbid, the former will outbid the latter, and there will not be redistribution. And then, at the stage where you decide whether or not to allow for AI, again, people will allow for AI, as in the other system I considered before this, but there won't be any UBI. Okay, so in both, under both assumptions, people will not lobby for blocking AI, but under the lobbying assumption, AI will be implemented, the middle class will collapse, and there will not be any redistribution. And therefore, there will be a very narrow range of goods that will be mass-produced. Whereas if the decisive oligarch produces a sophisticated good, then again, AI will be implemented, but with redistribution, and therefore there will be more goods that will be industrialized. Okay, and I am short of time. I have talked too much, so it's wise to stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Gilles, for this very insightful presentation. So now we can, how do we start questions? If in the audience you have some questions to Gilles, please raise your hand. Okay, so Maximilian, you have the floor, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that presentation, which I just really interesting. I have two questions. So number one is, it seemed to me in the beginning on one of the first slides when you had the equation that there is an assumption of a monopoly of the knowledge of the mass production.
Yes.
Because you can still charge the normal price that you would have in case of manual production. So what would happen if you have competition and this price actually decreases? Would your assumptions and your consequences still hold, and the consequences that you laid out? So that's my first question, and then maybe I'll just follow up with a second already. The second question is, you mentioned that in earlier stages of automation, it was assumed that it impacted mostly the lower class. But in the first graph that you showed, we could see that basically the employment of the lower class is very stable over the years. So probably the lower skilled employees found other industries to work in. Would it be possible that the same is actually true for the middle class in terms of AI, that they will shift to other sectors like the service sector or others?
Yes, okay, thank you for these questions. Two very important questions. Regarding your first question, I think it would not, well, I did not do it because you need to be a little bit acrobatic relative to competition, because if you have two firms that own the same technology that has increasing returns, then it's complicated. And if they play Bertrand, they would charge marginal cost, but then they would make losses. So it was, of course, much more convenient to assume that there is a single owner of the technology. But you could assume, okay, that there are two, that they end up in some sort of oligopoly. And then it could be that the price falls. Let's assume the price falls, then it transfers part of the profits of the mass production technology to the people. And so it's still true, if you want, that that in the low equilibrium, or that under AI, the returns to skills would be very low, will be much lower. It's still true that there could be multiple equilibria, but the low equilibrium could be less harmful to the people, because they would still benefit from lower prices in the industrialized sectors. So the results would change somewhat, but not the central results, I would say. And regarding your second question, it's tricky because the literature has distinguished, when talking about the effects of ICT on the distribution of earnings, the literature has said that what was harmed are routine tasks, but not non-routine tasks, and therefore, if you are at the bottom of the distribution of wages and you perform a routine task, then you are displaced. But if you perform a non-routine task, then you are not exposed, and it could be that for some reason the demand for your labor goes up instead of down. Okay? Of course, a key question in the debate is that we know that when technical progress strikes somewhere, the people who are substitute for this technical progress are harmed, but historically, with time, people have been able to do something else instead, to relocate to other sectors, and therefore, in the medium run, everybody has benefited from the innovation. Some people believe that it will be the case again with AI. I don't know, but here I am considering a sort of doomsday scenario where, by construction, AI is a general purpose technology. It's not like a computer program that does the accounting, but nothing else. I can talk to the AI, and I can ask AI to categorize data regardless of those data, for example. So if we think of AI as a general purpose technology, then it could be that everybody, all kinds of skills, any skill is replaceable by AI. I'm not claiming that it's true. I am claiming that this opens up interesting possibilities, and these are the possibilities that I am analyzing in this paper. If it were not the case, then AI would act upon the economy just like preceding waves of technical progress, and at the end of the day, it would not harm skills, it would not harm the middle class, it would just harm some people during some transitional period, and after this transitional period, things would be okay for everybody. But here I am considering the doomsday scenario.
Thanks a lot.
So are there some other questions from the audience to Gilles? Please don't hesitate. We have one. So Aaron. So hello, Aaron. You have the floor, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Saint-Paul, for the very, very fascinating talk. I was wondering if you have already thought about the extreme end of the skills spectrum, where it's not in the interest of the company to have a larger market share because they have an artificial limitation of their products, which make it even more important. I'm thinking of high-end luxury products. How does that influence the balance that you've been talking about, or is that segment too small to be relevant? Because typically this would be where the very rich start consuming, and then there's a different dynamic, I would imagine.
So I'm going to answer in maybe a narrow-minded way, but in my model, those kind of goods are not mass-produced, okay? So, of course, this is a very stark model, but as a way of consequence, they don't need bureaucrats, and so they are not going to use skilled workers, okay? So if I am the captain of the yacht of Leonardo DiCaprio, for example, I might be very highly paid, but there is only one customer, and I'm not going to recruit lots of accountants and IT workers, and I don't need HR and so forth. So this is the way I view this